Portugal's story begins with Celtic tribes who arrived around 700 BCE, establishing hilltop settlements and developing a warrior culture. These Lusitanians fiercely resisted Roman conquest for decades under leaders like Viriathus. Rome finally subdued the region in 25 BCE, incorporating it into the province of Lusitania. For nearly 500 years, Romagnol transformed the landscape with roads, aqueducts, and cities like Alisipo. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Visigothic kingdoms ruled until the Islamic conquest of 711 CE. The Moorish invasion swept across Iberia with breathtaking speed. Within 7 years, Muslim armies controlled virtually the entire peninsula, establishing Al-Andalus. For 3 centuries, much of future Portugal lived under Islamic rule. The Moors introduced advanced irrigation, new crops, and mathematical knowledge that would prove crucial to later Portuguese achievements. Portugal's emergence as an independent nation was forged in the crucible of the Christian Reconquista. The turning point came in 1128 when Afonso Henriques, son of Henry of Burgundy, defeated his own mother Teresa at the Battle of Snow Mamed to claim control of the county of Portugal. This bold move set the stage for Portuguese independence. On July 25, 1139, at the Battle of Eurique, Afonso Henriques achieved a stunning victory against a much larger Moorish force. Legend claims that Christ himself appeared to promise victory, and Afonso proclaimed himself the first king of Portugal. By 1143, the Treaty of Zamora officially recognized Portuguese independence from Leon, making Portugal one of Europe's earliest nation-states. The new kingdom faced an enormous challenge, pushing Islamic forces southward while avoiding absorption by larger Christian neighbors. Afonso's successors continued the Reconquista with methodical determination. King Sancho I captured key territories in the late 12th century, while Afonso II and Sancho II extended Portuguese control through central regions. The decisive moment came under Afonso III, who completed the conquest by taking the Algarve from the Moors in 1249. Portugal had achieved its modern continental borders, making it the first Iberian kingdom to complete its Reconquista. With territorial consolidation complete, Portugal faced a crucial question: what next? The answer would reshape world history. Blocked from eastward expansion by Castile and surrounded by ocean on 2 sides, Portuguese rulers looked to the sea. The vision of Prince Henry the Navigator, though he never sailed himself, revolutionized exploration by establishing a navigation school at Sagres around 1418. Henry's systematic approach combined practical navigation with theoretical knowledge, attracting scholars, cartographers, and sailors from across Europe. Portuguese expeditions pushed steadily down the African coast, each voyage extending knowledge and challenging medieval myths about impassable seas and monsters. In 1434, Gillies rounded Cape Bajador, proving that sailors could venture beyond the green sea of darkness and return alive. The breakthrough came in 1488 when Bartolomeu Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving that a sea route to Asia was possible. A decade later, Vasco da Gama completed the epic voyage to India, opening direct European access to Asian spices and luxury goods. This achievement was revolutionary, breaking the monopoly of Mediterranean middlemen and Arab traders who had controlled Asian commerce for centuries. Meanwhile, Portuguese explorers were making other momentous discoveries. In 1500, Pedro Álvares Cabral, blown off course while sailing to India, landed in Brazil and claimed it for Portugal. This accident proved providential, as Brazil would become Portugal's most valuable colony. The 16th century marked Portugal's imperial zenith. Portuguese trading posts and colonies stretched from Brazil to Macau, creating the world's first truly global empire. The Estado de India controlled strategic points like Goa, Malacca, and Hormuz, dominating Indian Ocean trade. Lisbon transformed into Europe's spice capital, where Asian pepper and cinnamon commanded premium prices. Portuguese merchants grew fabulously wealthy, funding magnificent architecture like the Jeronimos Monastery, masterpieces of Manueline style celebrating maritime achievements. Brazilian colonization expanded dramatically with sugar plantations. Portuguese settlers, lacking sufficient labor, began importing enslaved Africans on a massive scale, establishing the horrific Atlantic slave trade. However, this golden age contained seeds of decline. The empire was overextended, with tiny Portugal struggling to defend global territories against Dutch, English, and French competitors. Constant warfare drained resources while wealth often passed through to purchase foreign manufactured goods rather than developing domestic industry. Disaster struck in 1578 when young King Sebastian died at the Battle of Alcácer Quibir in Morocco, leaving no direct heir. The succession crisis that followed ended Portuguese independence when Philip II of Spain claimed the throne in 1580, beginning 60 years of Spanish rule known as the Iberian Union. Under Spanish control, Portugal retained nominal autonomy, but Spanish priorities dominated policy. The Dutch, rebelling against Spanish rule, attacked Portuguese territories worldwide, seizing key Asian possessions like Malacca and Ceylon and temporarily occupying northeastern Brazil. Portuguese merchants found themselves excluded from Spanish-controlled markets, while Spain's European wars drained Portuguese resources. Growing resentment culminated in the 1640 Portuguese Restoration led by the Duke of Braganza, who became King John IV. The Restoration triggered the Portuguese Restoration War, a brutal 28-year conflict as Spain attempted to reconquer its lost territory. Portuguese forces, aided by France and England, employed guerrilla tactics and strategic alliances to resist Spanish reconquest. The war's conclusion in 1668 with the Treaty of Lisbon confirmed Portuguese independence, but the cost was enormous. The empire had contracted significantly, with the Netherlands controlling former Portuguese territories in Asia and threatening Brazilian sugar regions. Portugal's global dominance was over, though the core empire remained intact. Portugal's fortunes revived dramatically in the late 17th century with the discovery of gold and diamonds in Brazil's interior. The Brazilian gold rush transformed both Brazil and Portugal, funding magnificent Baroque architecture in Brazilian mining towns like Ouro Preto while financing royal extravagance in Lisbon. King John V used Brazilian wealth to construct the massive Mafra Palace and support a luxurious court that rivaled Versailles. However, much of this wealth was squandered on conspicuous consumption rather than productive investment, leaving Portugal dependent on foreign manufactured goods while its own industries stagnated. The reign of King Joseph I brought Portugal's most influential minister, the Marquis of Pombal, who implemented sweeping reforms following Enlightenment principles. Pombal modernized education, promoted commerce and industry, reduced noble privileges, and expelled the Jesuits, whom he blamed for hindering progress. His economic policies attempted to break Portugal's dependence on foreign goods by protecting domestic industries and reorganizing colonial trade. On November 1, 1755, Portugal faced one of history's most devastating natural disasters. The Great Lisbon earthquake, followed by tsunamis and fires, destroyed much of the capital and killed an estimated 100,000 people. The catastrophe shocked Europe, inspiring philosophical debates about divine providence and natural disasters. Pombal's response proved masterful. Rather than simply rebuilding the old city, he implemented a comprehensive urban planning scheme that created the modern Baixa district with its geometric streets, standardized buildings, and earthquake-resistant construction techniques. The Reconstruction demonstrated Enlightenment rationality and became a model for modern urban planning. The earthquake's impact extended beyond architecture. It accelerated secularization as people questioned religious explanations for natural disasters, while Pombal used the crisis to consolidate royal power and implement further reforms. The Reconstruction also demonstrated Portuguese resilience and adaptability in the face of catastrophe. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars brought new challenges. Portugal's traditional alliance with Britain conflicted with Napoleon's continental system, which demanded that all European ports close to British trade. Caught between French threats and British protection, Portugal faced an impossible choice. In 1807, Napoleon's armies invaded Portugal, forcing the royal family to flee to Brazil under British naval protection. This unprecedented move made Rio de Janeiro the effective capital of the Portuguese Empire. The royal presence transformed Brazil, opening its ports to international trade and elevating its status within the empire. Portuguese resistance to French occupation, supported by British forces under the Duke of Wellington, became legendary. The Peninsula War featured brutal guerrilla warfare and devastated much of the country, but Portuguese determination ultimately contributed to Napoleon's defeat. When King John VI returned to Lisbon in 1821, he left his son Pedro as regent in Brazil. Growing Brazilian autonomy and Portuguese attempts to reimpose colonial restrictions created irreconcilable tensions. In 1822, Pedro declared Brazilian independence, becoming Emperor Pedro I. After brief military conflicts, Portugal recognized Brazilian independence in 1825, losing its most valuable colony. Brazil's loss coincided with Portugal's liberal revolution of 1820. Inspired by Spanish liberal movements and Portuguese military officers' exposure to British constitutional ideas during the Peninsula War, the revolution forced King John VI to accept a constitutional monarchy and liberal reforms. However, Portugal soon split between liberals supporting constitutional government and absolutists defending traditional monarchy. When John VI died in 1826, succession disputes triggered the Liberal Wars, a brutal civil conflict between Pedro and Miguel. The Civil War devastated Portugal and polarized society between urban liberals and rural traditionalists. Pedro's victory in 1834 established constitutional monarchy but left deep divisions. Political instability continued for decades, with frequent government changes, military interventions, and competing factions struggling for control. The late 19th century brought relative stability under the Regeneration period, emphasizing modernization and infrastructure development. Portugal built railways, improved roads, and expanded telegraph networks, gradually integrating the country economically and politically. With Brazil gone, Portugal refocused on its African territories of Angola and Mozambique. The Berlin Conference of 1884–85 regulated European colonization of Africa, and Portugal used historical claims to secure international recognition of its African empire. However, Portuguese control often remained superficial, limited to coastal areas and major river routes. The 1890 British ultimatum humiliated Portugal by forcing abandonment of the Pink Map project connecting Angola and Mozambique. This diplomatic defeat discredited the monarchy and fueled republican sentiment among urban intellectuals and military officers. Economic problems persisted despite modernization efforts. Portugal remained primarily agricultural with limited industry, while emigration to Brazil and other countries drained human resources. The monarchy increasingly appeared obsolete to educated Portuguese who admired French republicanism and British parliamentary democracy. The Portuguese First Republic began on October 5, 1910, when military officers and civilians overthrew King Manuel II in Lisbon. The revolution reflected urban dissatisfaction with monarchical rule, but the new republic struggled from the beginning with political instability and economic challenges. The republic implemented anti-clerical policies, separating church and state, secularizing education, and restricting religious influence. These measures alienated Catholic rural populations who formed the monarchy's traditional base. Political fragmentation produced 45 governments in 16 years, preventing consistent policy implementation. World War I further destabilized the republic. Portugal entered the war in 1916 supporting Britain, but military campaigns in Africa and France proved costly and unpopular. Economic inflation, food shortages, and military casualties increased public discontent. Social tensions escalated throughout the 1920s. Urban workers organized strikes while rural populations remained largely conservative and Catholic. Political violence became common, with assassinations and military coups attempted regularly. The Republic's inability to provide stable governance prepared the ground for authoritarian alternatives. A military coup on May 28, 1926, ended the First Republic and established a military dictatorship. Initially, the regime lacked clear direction until Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, an economics professor, became finance minister in 1928 and eventually dictator. Salazar established the Estado Novo, a conservative authoritarian regime emphasizing order, tradition, and Catholic values. The dictatorship suppressed political opposition through the secret police, censorship, and repression, while promoting Portuguese nationalism and imperial pride. Economically, Salazar pursued autarky and financial orthodoxy, achieving budget surpluses but limiting growth. Portugal remained largely agricultural and underdeveloped compared to Western European neighbors. The regime's corporatist economic model restricted labor organization and maintained social hierarchy. Portugal managed to remain neutral during World War II, though Salazar's sympathies lay with fascist powers initially. The regime's survival after 1945 depended on anti-communist sentiment during the Cold War and Portugal's strategic value to NATO, which the country joined in 1949. The 1960s brought growing challenges. African independence movements in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau launched guerrilla wars against Portuguese rule. The colonial wars drained resources and caused mounting casualties, while international pressure for decolonization isolated Portugal diplomatically. On April 25, 1974, the Carnation Revolution overthrew the Estado Novo in a virtually bloodless coup led by military officers frustrated with the colonial wars. The revolution's peaceful nature, symbolized by red carnations in soldiers' rifle barrels, marked a dramatic break with authoritarian rule. The transition to democracy proved remarkably smooth. Portugal granted independence to its African colonies, accepted hundreds of thousands of returning settlers, and established a democratic constitution in 1976. The Socialist and Social Democratic parties emerged as dominant political forces. European integration became Portugal's primary foreign policy goal. Portugal joined the European Economic Community in 1986, bringing modernization funds that transformed Portuguese infrastructure and economy. Portugal adopted the euro in 1999 and successfully integrated into European institutions. The 21st century has seen Portugal emerge as a modern European democracy committed to human rights and international cooperation. The country decriminalized drug use, legalized same-sex marriage, and became a leader in renewable energy. Today's Portugal has successfully transformed from authoritarian isolation to democratic European integration, proving that small nations can reinvent themselves while preserving their unique cultural identity. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your friends. I also create videos on the history of different countries and empires, so check out those too.